Hi, I'm Mrs. Wackerly, and I'm reading chapter 20 from Peak by Roland Smith. This chapter is called Camp 4. Zopa roused Holly and me out of our tents at sunrise. Another beautiful day, clear, crisp, 22 degrees and rising, which means we'd have to pack our cold weather gear on our backs instead of wearing it. To make things worse, Zopa gave each of us a pile of Sunjo's gear to haul up to the first camp. Holly's share was a lot smaller than my share. She finished repacking quickly and left for the mess tent. It took me 45 minutes to reorganize what I'd packed the night before. I was slowed down by my ill feelings toward Sunjo and Zopa. I couldn't believe it. Not only had Zopa taken my gear and given it to Sunjo, but now I had to haul it up the mountain for him. It seemed that he was doing everything in his power to make sure I was too weak to get to the top. When I finally finished, my pack was 15 pounds heavier than it was for my first time up to ABC. Not good. 1 pound can make a huge difference at this altitude. I was trying to decide what to leave behind when Captain Sheck walked up. "You try for summit?" he demanded. He was out of uniform, dressed like a climber, which is probably why I didn't notice him sneaking up on me. "Not today," I said. "How old you?" He must have been watching and had waited to catch me alone like this. "How old you?" he repeated aggressively. Trick question. He'd seen my passport. He knew exactly how old I was. He wanted me to lie. I told him the truth. "Where other boy?" Uh-oh. "Who?" I'm a terrible liar. "Boy you climb mountain with last week. Boy you walk with in camp. You and he good friends." Captain Sheck's English was a little rough, but the sarcasm was crystal clear. He had watched us walking around camp. He had seen us head up the mountain to ABC. "Oh, him," I said stupidly. "I haven't seen him in a couple days." "Where he go?" I shrugged. "You lying to me!" Apparently I couldn't even shrug a lie. "I kick you off mountain if you lie." "Go ahead," I said, zipping my pack closed. Probably not the brightest thing to say, but I'd had about enough of Captain Sheck and everything else on Everest. He looked like he was about to explode. I don't think he was used to having a 14-year-old call his bluff. He raised his arm. For a second I thought he was going to hit me, but he smiled as if he realized "this is the People's Republic of China, you have no rights" thing wasn't going to work with me. "What is other boy's name?" he asked in a much more reasonable tone. "He didn't say." I picked up my pack. "I watching you." I walked away, feeling his eyes drilling into the back of my neck, proud of myself for not even thinking about ratting out Sunjo. As soon as I found Zopa, I told him about the conversation. He was a lot calmer about it than I was, saying that Captain Sheck was the least of our problems. "In a few days, you will be at Camp 4, he said. "This is all you need to worry about." It turned out that he was right. We joined a small group of porters and their yaks heading up the mountain. Sunjo was not with them. When I asked Zopa about this, he said he will be along. The trip up to intermediate camp was a lot easier than the first time. I wasn't able to sing and chant with the porters, but I was able to talk as I walked, which was a big improvement. I even managed to use the tiny video camera and discovered that I was a lot more comfortable behind it than I was in front of it. The landscape had changed dramatically from the previous week. The warm weather had created several new streams of glacial runoff. It was difficult to find places to cross without drenching ourselves. The other problem was the rocks. The thaw was causing them to pop loose from the ice. It was like the glacier was a bowling lane and we were the pins. One of the porters and his yak got hit by a large rock and had to return to base camp. "Did you get the strike on tape?" Jack asked. No. He swore. I spent most of the trip with Holly, who wasn't doing that well, I think because she was carrying her own pack. I offered to lug it for a while, but she insisted on carrying it herself, for which I was relieved. She said she was thinking about heading home after we got down from Camp 4 and wanted to know if I would give her an exclusive interview after I got down from the summit. "You're going to quit?" Reaching the summit of Everest was not on my to-do list this year. If it had been, I might have done some practice climbs and visited the gym a little more leading up to this. Or maybe even climbed a skyscraper or two. She grinned and pointed at the peak. The clouds had cleared enough for us to see the very top. "I don't know if you've noticed, but that's one of the most daunting sights on Earth." "You don't strike me as easily daunted." "Yeah, well," she took a deep breath. "I've learned a couple things about myself up here. 1, I'm getting older. And 2, she took another deep breath. This mountain is a lot bigger than I am. It's humbling. The truth is, I've had time to do some thinking. I can't tell you how long it's been since I've been alone. That's humbling, too. Pierre and Ralph taking off was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Being in a camp with over 300 people is not exactly being alone, but I knew what she meant. You don't have to be alone to feel alone. What about that interview? She asked again. I'd been doing some thinking, too. We'll see, I said. I could tell that Holly wanted to argue, but she was too out of breath to pursue it. She and I straggled into camp after everyone else, and we were both surprised to see Sunjo sitting on a rock with a cup of hot tea in his hands, looking a little rumpled in his porter clothes. When did you get here? A half an hour ago. You left ahead of us? No, he said. I left the same time that you left. I thought he was pulling my leg. There had been a dozen or so porters and maybe half that number of yaks. I couldn't have missed him. I rode on Gulu's yak. Yeah, right, I said. When you were a baby, I had walked with Gulu some of the way up. The only thing I'd seen on his yak's back was a pile of hay. No, Sunjo insisted. I was concealed beneath the hay. You're kidding. He shook his head. It was hot and uncomfortable. I told him about Captain Shek. A worried look crossed his face. That means I'll have to go up the mountain again on the yak. I'm not looking forward to that. Thank you for carrying my things up here. I wished he wasn't always so polite. It would be easier to be mad at him. No problem, I said, and I realized that the extra weight hadn't been a problem. That was encouraging. I looked around camp. It had not improved in the past week. The boulder-belching slope looked even more unstable than the last time we had been there. Zopa was looking at the slope, too, shaking his head. We cannot camp here tonight, he said. We will go farther up. I didn't recall anywhere to camp farther up, and I was right. He stopped us about 1,000 feet above the collapsing wall and had us carve sleeping platforms into the ice. It took hours, and it was exhausting work at that altitude, but I was happy to do it. Anything was better than sleeping under the wall. The next morning, the cold was back, which was good because it lessened the chances of avalanches. On the way to Camp 2, we heard over the radio that there were 3 climbing parties moving up to Camp 5. They were going to make a summit attempt the following day. Gulu was concerned because they had only taken 1 load of oxygen tanks to Camp 5. Zopa radioed Josh. I heard, Josh said. Idiots. None of them are fully acclimatized. This is only their second time above Camp 4. As far as the tanks go, some of them are going to try to get to the top without supplemental O's. So there should be enough for those who need it. If the weather holds, Zopa said. I talked to them about that, but their concern is that there won't be another good weather window. Nothing we can do about it. After they get to Camp 5, they're on their own. What he meant by this is that above Camp 5, there is little chance for rescue. The air is too thin for a helicopter, and at that altitude, everyone is too out of it to help anyone but themselves. If you die above Camp 5, your corpse stays there forever. Oh, Josh said, one more thing. Captain Shek has been around asking about a Sherpa boy. Says he thinks he came up on the truck with you. Sunjo, Zopa said. He left a few days ago to go back to school. He just came up for the ride. I'll pass that on to the captain. This part of the conversation was obviously completely planned for Captain Shek's benefit. The only problem now was that if the captain caught sight of Sunjo again, Zopa was going to be in trouble too. Everything else okay? Josh asked. Yes, we are all fine. I'll check in later. Zopa signed off and JR pointed his video camera at Zopa. Do you think those climbers will make it to the summit? Perhaps, Zopa said, but it is too early in the season. If they make it, others will try, and some of them will die. There are no shortcuts to the top of Sagarmatha. By the time we reached ABC the following afternoon, we were all exhausted, especially Sunjo, who was feeling the effects of his recent illness. In a role reversal from our last time at ABC, I made dinner for us while he lay in his sleeping bag. I'd like to say that I felt sorry for him, but the truth was that I didn't. I was still resentful about his horning in on my climb. After we ate, I went outside and found the porters and Sherpas sorting through the gear they were going to haul up to Camp 5. Zopa explained that the yaks could not go much past ABC. The Sherpas would carry the gear on their backs to Camps 4, 5, and 6 and establish camps a few days before we made our summit attempt. In the meantime, a couple of them would stay at ABC to guard our stuff. People would steal it? I said. It has happened, Zopa said. Not all expeditions are as well equipped or funded as your father's. Some climbers come to the mountain with nothing more than what they can carry, and sometimes they borrow equipment they find along the way. The next morning, he had us lighten our packs, carrying only what we needed for a night at Camp 4, which was a good thing because 3 hours above ABC, we reached the foot of the col, which is basically a pass between two peaks. It was clear why the col was a dead end for the yaks. The wall leading up to the pass was enormous, and from the base it looked terrifyingly unstable. Half of the wall was smooth, rounded off by strong winds, giving it the look of soft ice cream. The other half was made out of nasty seracs, or ice towers, that looked like giant jagged teeth. If I'd had enough breath, the sight would have taken it away. I looked at my altimeter watch. 7,000 meters, or 22,965 feet. Holly slogged up and rested her hands on her knees before looking up at the terrible wall. "No," gasp, "way," she said. I agreed. Yogi and Yash walked up next, frowning and shaking their heads. Zopa and Sunjo arrived last. Zopa was carrying Sunjo's pack. Sunjo looked really bad. When he saw the wall, his face filled with dread. I almost felt sorry for him. "Imagine what it was like 2 days ago when it was thawing," Zopa said. It was a good point. 3 teams had made it up to the col in worse conditions than this. The first stage was the hardest. It was a steep pitch of soft ice. Sherpas had cut steps into the ice, and there were fixed ropes, but the ice was slick, and the ropes were still coated with ice because we were the first up that day. We fell into an agonizing rhythm. Slide the Jumar up the rope. A Jumar is a mechanical ascender with a handle that slides up the rope and grabs on so you have something to hold on to as you pull yourself up. Step, breathe, Jumar. Step. 3 hours later, it was more like Jumar, think, look up, think again, step, rest, 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 hug the wall, pray. As a chunk of ice the size of a Hummer fell past, crashing below, followed by the sound of our leaders, Yogi and Yash, laughing. Real funny. They were breaking away the loose ice along our route so it wouldn't unexpectedly peel us off the wall or knock our heads off our butts, helmet and all. I was next in line, followed by the film crew, Holly, Sunjo, and Zopa. The climb was anything but quiet, with the brothers shouting, "Ice!" and Zopa shouting, "Faster!" 4 hours after we started up, I reached the steepest pitch, 50 feet. It might as well have been 50 miles. My arms and legs were numb and virtually useless, but the worst part was the air. There wasn't any, or so it seemed. Each breath seemed to yield only a thimbleful of precious oxygen. Maybe enough to keep a bird alive, but not enough for an exhausted 14-year-old climber. Dr. Wu had been wrong. There was something the matter with me. Yogi and Yash were already on top. One of them was manning the ropes, and I hoped the other was boiling snow at Camp 4. We would all need a steaming cup of tea when we got there. If we got there. Holly, Sunjo, and Zopa had dropped further behind, but I could still hear Zopa shouting at them to move faster. I was about ready to give up and head back down and go home when JR came up behind me. He looked terrible. His beard and goggles were covered with ice. It was a wonder he could see where he was going. "Thanks for waiting," he rasped. "I need to film you arriving. Give me a couple minutes head start to set the shot." I didn't have the breath to tell him I hadn't been waiting. I looked at my watch, and by the time I figured out what time it was, JR was already several feet above me. Without actually thinking about it, I started up behind him. An hour later, when I finally reached the top, Yogi hauled me over the edge by my backpack, which I was sure was not the shot JR wanted. Yogi's assist reminded me of that 7 weeks ago to the day a cop had done the same thing to me on the top of the Woolworth building. I'd come a long way, and I felt like it. I spent a good 10 minutes on my knees trying to catch my breath until it dawned on me again that this altitude there was no breath to catch. With difficulty, I got to my feet and stumbled over to where Yash was trying to boil water. Camp 4 was tiny, and to make it worse, there was a gaping crevasse running underneath the crest, which I'd read was getting wider every year. Some believed that one of these days, hopefully not today, the whole thing would collapse and climbers would have to devise a new route up the north side. I looked toward the summit, which was shrouded in gray mist, but I could see enough to pick out the route along the north ridge and across the north face to the pyramid. It looked like a very long way from where Yash and I were squatting. I couldn't imagine the 3 climbing parties trying for the top feeling like I did. My ribs ached from trying to get enough O's into my lungs to survive. I knew that Zopa was carrying at least 2 tanks in case of emergency, and I suspected that Yogi and Yash had a couple stashed as well. Sherpas do not climb without loads. For them, that would be a waste of effort. I thought about begging Yash for a hit of the tank, but resisted the urge, knowing it would defeat the purpose of the climb. Instead, I started to put together my tent, which seemed a lot more complicated than it had at ABC the day before. Jack and Will came over the top next. Will spent a good 10 minutes on his hands and knees puking. JR did not film this. 45 minutes later, I was still working on the tent when Yogi hauled Holly over the edge, followed by Sunjo and Zopa. Zopa was shaking his head in disgust, muttering, "Too slow, too slow, too slow." He bent down to the 2 slow pokes. "If you climb like that above here, you can forget the summit." Holly and Sunjo were out of it and didn't appear to have the slightest idea of what he was saying. I thought he was being pretty harsh, considering Holly's lack of conditioning and Sunjo's recent sickness. He came over to where I was struggling with the tent, and I thought, here it comes. But instead he patted me on the back. "You did good," he said. "You have a chance." That was like a whole tank of O's flowing into my bloodstream. Maybe he wasn't going to try to stop me from getting to the summit. Suddenly, the tent made complete sense. I had it together in less than 5 minutes. I got everything unpacked, the pads and sleeping bags spread out. Then I started on Holly's tent as she and Sunjo watched through dull, lifeless eyes. The burst of energy cost me. As soon as I finished, it was all I could do to get to my feet. Zopa brought over 3 mugs of tea and made us drink them down. "Get your stoves going," he said. "I know you are not hungry, but you have to eat and drink." He looked at the sky. "It's going to snow tonight."